Hello world, we are students in class 9BA at Vietnam Australia International School, and it's our pleasure to present to you guys the effect of climate change in the world and particularly in our home country, Vietnam. First of all, we're gonna go through the content of the presentation. Our presentation has three parts. The first part is the impact of climate change on the economy and the human. Second part, we will explain how wildlife affected by climate change, and the last part is how climate change influences our country.
There's two types of effects that climate change has on humans. Firstly, is the population of animal and human is constantly increased over years, which means that in a few years' time there won't be enough space for animal and human. Secondly, is the economies will be affected. For example, agriculture, forestry, and manufacturing industry, because there's not enough space for all of that. First, we will talk about how it will impact humans.
The appearance of more aggressive natural disasters, droughts, fires, death of animals and plants, the development of climate refugees, and the degradation of the food chain and economic resource, particularly in developing countries, are also growing as a result of climate change. Every country is facing the damaging consequences of rapidly melting glaciers, which require enormous financial to minimize them. The worst thing is that the increasing melting of the ice cannot be prevented because of the rising rate of global warming. The rise in global temperature brings devastating effects, endangering the survival of the plants and animals of the world, including humans. The worst effects of climate change including melting glaciers, which causes sea level to rise, causing floods and threatening coastal areas where small island states are at risk of completely disappearing. There are regions that have ice glaciers at higher altitudes, and many of them are increasingly thawing, allowing the melting of other water bodies, such as rivers, lakes, and seas, to create an abrupt increase in water input. These events are very concerning, as the amount of the water may be very high. The consequence is overflowing, which will be a massive disaster as they will damage everything on their way, creating thousands of homeless people like this situation in Bangladesh. It is predicted that by 2100, 4 million people will have no place to live because of the extreme flooding.
Secondly, we are going to mention the factors affecting wildlife, effects on animals and wildlife, warming up causing drought and may cause wildfires, leading to a decrease in population and a change in food chain resources. For instance, the wildfire in Australia in December 2019, the change in wildlife lead to animals and plants can't adapt to the change, therefore are at risk of extinction. Many species such as butterflies, bears, seals need to move to higher, cooler areas, while some species populations such as mosquitoes, jellyfish, ticks, and bark beetles will bloom, leading to a devastation of millions of forest arcs. In hopes of preventing a catastrophe, the United States Forest Service, which oversees 80% of the country's woodlands, has launched a beetle offensive, chopping down trees to prevent future infestations. They believe this strategy will reduce trees' competition for resources, allowing the few remaining have better resistance against bugs. This theory just so happens to also benefit loggers, who are more than willing to help thin for the forest. Politicians, too, have cooperated on behalf of the timber industry. More than 50 civil rights were introduced since 2001 in Congress, proposing an increase in timber harvest to help deal with beetle outbreaks.
So moving on to our last part of the presentation, which is effects of climate change in our country. Firstly is increase in rainfall. The flood, because increase in rainfall, it caused several floods, and it caused significant damage to human and infrastructure in central Vietnam due to heavy rains and floods that continuously occur in a large area and lasted for many days. The thing that we most concerned about is 40% of today's poor people in Vietnam are exposed to flooding, and the increase in rainfall also caused a landslide in Vietnam from 1953 to 2016. The mountainous and midland provinces suffered a total of 448 landslides, with average 7 landslides per year, cause many have destroyed lots of crop area and death. Secondly is a rise in sea level. Salinity intrusion was the thing that we most concerned about, especially in Mekong River Delta, because 85% of Mekong River Delta population lives on agricultural activities. The region produces and supplies 90% of national rice export and nearly 60% of the country's total export turnover from fishery products. So when the salinity intrusion happened, it caused approximately 590,000 hectare rice area loss, which accounts for 30% of today's rice production. And the diagram of the top right corner shows how salinity intrusions affects Mekong River Delta. The rise sea levels also cause land loss in several areas in Vietnam, and especially Mekong River Delta, because it's the most vulnerable place in Vietnam if rise sea level happens. So forecasts have confirmed that our country's sea level could increase 33.3 centimeter in 2050 and 45 centimeter in 2070, about 1 meter by 2000 in the year 2100. If this scenario happened, 40% of land in Mekong River Delta will be lost, and this is where 12 million tons of agricultural products produced per year, and 10 to 12% population affected and damaged 10% of GDP. The diagram at the bottom left corner shows what could happen in the year of 2015 if the rise in sea level. Thirdly is more frequent, more vigorous natural disaster. For example, in 2017 is the year when the number of storms affecting our country usually much, 16 storms. And according to the calculations of the Central Steering Committee for Natural Disaster Prevention in the General Statistics Office, of the damage about 38.7 thousand billion Vietnam dong, equivalent to 2.7 billion USD. And lastly is increase in temperature, because increase in temperature because fires in the forest, and especially in 2018, the total area of forest fire in Vietnam had reached nearly 14.5 million hectares, with the coverage rate about 41.65%.
So this is our last and our least and we will show you all our sources and links that we have searching around the internet for a while. So goodbye and see you next week.